There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over a house after many years of living alone. You stop noticing it. It becomes the shape of your days. This is a story about a woman in her 70s who had made her peace with that quiet, completely, honestly, without regret, and about the ordinary Saturday morning when someone she'd known a lifetime ago walked back into the room. If you've ever built a good life on your own, or watched someone you love do it, this one may sit close to home. Stay with me. I think you'll be glad you did. Her name is Hazel. She lives in a small house on the edge of a mid-sized town, the kind of place where the same streets have carried her for 40 years. She raised 2 children in that house. She buried a husband from it 11 years back, and in the long season after, she did something a lot of people never quite manage. She built a life that was genuinely, unmistakably hers. She was not lonely. I want to be clear about that because the world tends to assume a woman alone must be waiting for something. Hazel wasn't. She had her garden. She had a Tuesday walking group and a library card she used hard. She had mornings that belonged to no one but her. If you had asked her, and people did ask her, whether she wanted to meet someone, she would have laughed kindly and told you no. She'd had her great love. She wasn't looking for another. She wasn't looking for anything. That's the thing about the moments that change us. They tend to arrive when we've stopped looking. It was a Saturday in early autumn. The library was holding its used book sale, the one they hold every year, folding tables crowded with paperbacks, a coffee urn in the corner, volunteers making change from a metal box. Hazel went for the mysteries. She always went for the mysteries. And she was standing at the end of a long table, turning a worn paperback over in her hands, when a voice beside her said her name. Not a question, just her name, said the way someone says it when they already know the answer. She looked up, and there was a face she had not seen in more than 50 years. His name was Thomas. They had gone to school together back when they were both too young to know anything. He had sat 2 rows over. He had once, memorably, spilled an entire bottle of ink across her homework and spent a week too embarrassed to look at her. And then life had done what life does. It had scattered them. Different towns, different marriages, different whole lives, lived a long way apart. Now here he was, holding a book about birds, gone gray, a little stooped, with the same crooked smile she suddenly remembered, as though no time had passed at all. They stood by the table and talked. And this is the part I want to slow down for, because it is the part that mattered. At first, it was the small, careful talk of 2 people finding their footing. Where do you live now? How many children? When did you move back? The polite map-making that strangers do, even strangers who once shared a classroom. But somewhere in the middle of it, the map-making stopped, and something older took its place. Thomas remembered things. That was what undid her a little. He remembered that their teacher had a habit of tapping the blackboard with a ruler. He remembered the name of the girl who sat by the window and cried during spelling tests. He remembered, and this is the one that made Hazel laugh out loud right there by the paperbacks, that Hazel had once corrected the teacher on the date of a battle and had been right, and had been made to stay after class anyway. No one had remembered these things with her in 50 years. Her husband, God rest him, had loved her completely, but he had not been there for the ruler on the blackboard, or the girl by the window, or the battle she'd gotten right. There are rooms of your life that only the people who were in them can walk back into. And here, improbably, was a man who could walk into a room she thought had been closed and locked since she was a girl. They talked until the volunteer with the metal box had to reach past them twice. They talked until the coffee urn was empty. They talked the way you talk when you've forgotten to be self-conscious, leaning in, interrupting, finishing the halves of sentences the other one had started. He told her at some point that he was widowed too. He said it plainly, the way you learn to say it after enough years, not as a wound, just as a fact of the geography. And she found she could say her own the same way back to him. That was its own small gift, to speak of the thing without having to manage the other person's face while she did it. He simply nodded. He knew the country she was describing. He lived there too. And Hazel noticed something she had not expected to notice. She was enjoying herself. Not in the way you enjoy a pleasant errand, in the way you enjoy a conversation you don't want to end. She went home that afternoon with 3 mysteries and a book about birds she had no use for, because he'd handed it to her and she hadn't wanted to give it back. And here is where the story could have ended. This is where, for a great many people, it does end. A nice moment, a pleasant surprise, something to mention to a friend on the phone and then let quietly go, because there is a fear that doesn't get talked about much, the fear of starting something at 73, of opening a door you'd made your peace with keeping closed. It is easier, genuinely easier, to keep the life you've already built. Hazel knew that. She'd earned her quiet. Why risk it? But Thomas had written his telephone number inside the front cover of that book about birds, in pencil, where she'd be sure to find it. She found it that evening at her kitchen table, with the light going gold in the window, and she sat with it a long while. She thought about all the reasons not to. She thought about how comfortable her life was, and how much a person can lose by wanting things. She was, remember, a woman who had told everyone, including herself, that she wasn't looking. Then she thought about the ink on her homework, 50 years gone, and about how good it had felt that morning to laugh with someone who remembered. She picked up the phone, and she dialed. They started slowly. Coffee at first. A diner halfway between their 2 houses, in a booth by the window on a Tuesday that neither of them had anything else to do with. That first coffee lasted 3 hours. The waitress refilled their cups until she stopped asking and just left the pot. And a rhythm began to build, the way rhythms do, one small thing at a time. Coffee became a standing Tuesday. Then Thomas asked if he could come along to the walking group, and the walking group gained a member, and the walking group teased her mercilessly about it, which is how you know a group of women approves of something. He was terrible at gardening, cheerfully, unrepentantly terrible. He pulled up 2 of her tomato seedlings, believing they were weeds, and was so mortified that she laughed until she had to sit down on the garden step. And then he came back the next week and was terrible at it again, beside her, on purpose, because being bad at gardening next to Hazel had turned out to be one of the better ways he knew to spend a morning. What grew between them was not the love of 2 young people who believe they have all the time in the world. It was something else, quieter, more grateful. 2 people who knew exactly what they were being given, because they both knew what it was to go without it. They read to each other, of all things. He'd gotten slower with his eyes, and she had a good, clear reading voice. So in the evenings, sometimes she'd read him the mysteries she loved, and he'd try to guess the ending, and get it wrong, and be delighted to be wrong. He fixed the gate that had hung crooked since her husband passed, the one she'd stopped seeing because she'd looked at it broken for so long. She started cooking for two again and found she'd missed it. Not the cooking exactly, but the having someone to cook for. And there was the ordinary daily joy of it. Someone to tell the small thing to. The bird at the feeder, the line in the book, the neighbor's ridiculous new fence, all the tiny observations that a person living alone simply lets fall, unspoken, because there's no one across the room to catch them. Hazel had made her peace with letting them fall. She had not known, until they stopped falling, how many of them there were, or how much she'd wanted to say them out loud. Her children were startled, then delighted. Her son drove down to meet him and came away shaking his head and smiling, because it is a strange and wonderful thing to watch a parent be happy in a way you'd stopped expecting. And Hazel, who had been genuinely, honestly happy alone, discovered that she could be happy in a different key entirely, that the quiet life she'd built didn't have to be knocked down to make room. It just had to make a little space by the window for a man who is bad at gardening and good at staying. There's something a lot of people in Hazel's generation came to understand, often late, sometimes by surprise, that making peace with a life is a good and hard-won thing. But peace is not the same as a closed door. It is a quiet act of courage to let something new in after you've already decided you don't need it. To risk the comfortable thing for the possibility of a fuller one. Not because you were lonely, not because you were waiting, but because the chance arrived and you were brave enough to say yes. Hazel wasn't looking for anyone. That was true right up until the morning it wasn't. And she would tell you, if she were the kind of person you could ask, that the years she almost talked herself out of turned out to be some of the best ones she was ever given. That was today's story. If it brought someone to mind, a parent, a neighbor, or an old friend, take a moment to reach out to them this week. Sometimes a simple conversation means more than we know. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel for more stories like this. And if you have a favorite memory or story of your own, feel free to share it in the comments below. I'd love to read it. Thank you for listening, and until next time, take care.